I want to tell you about the house first. Not because the house matters, not anymore, but because it's where everything started and where everything ended, and I think you need to see it the way I saw it before any of this happened. Before I understood what silence could hide. It sits on a quiet street outside Denver. The kind of street where people wave from their driveways and keep their lawns edged and never ask each other anything real. 2 stories, dark gray siding, a covered porch I repainted myself the summer before all of this. The finished basement took me 11 months, weekends, evenings, whatever time I could carve out after work. Concrete floors I laid myself, drywall I hung by hand. I built that room from the studs out, and I was proud of it the way men get proud of things they make with their own hands. The kind of pride that's quiet and private and doesn't need an audience. The SUV in the driveway, the flower beds Claire planted and I watered, the neighborhood that looked from the outside exactly like what it was supposed to be. My name is Ronald, 43 years old, senior project manager for a commercial construction firm that builds office parks and distribution centers and the kind of large, unremarkable buildings that hold cities together without anyone noticing. I have managed budgets in the millions and timelines that don't forgive mistakes and crews of men who can smell weakness the way dogs smell fear. I am not a man who falls apart. I am a man who looks at a problem, maps the variables, and builds a solution that lasts. I believed, and I want you to hear this clearly because it matters, I genuinely believed that a marriage worked the same way. You laid the foundation right. You picked your partner carefully. You showed up every single day, even on the days you didn't feel like it, even when the walls went cold and the rooms got quiet and you couldn't remember the last time either of you laughed without effort. You didn't walk away from something you built just because it got hard. That wasn't weakness. That was integrity. Claire was 41 when this story begins. Pharmaceutical sales, the kind of job that keeps you polished and articulate and permanently half-packed for the next flight out. She was confident in the way people are confident when the world has always rewarded them for showing up and smiling. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a laugh that could fill a room when she wanted it to. I am not going to pretend I didn't love her because I did, fully without reservation for a long time. I wasn't a romantic in the grand gesture sense. I didn't write notes or plan surprises or show up with flowers for no reason. What I did was quieter than that. I paid the bills before she noticed them. I fixed the things she didn't know were broken. The slow leak under the bathroom sink, the loose railing on the back steps, the garage door that dragged every winter. I kept the routines she never acknowledged. The groceries, the oil changes, the insurance renewals, the small mechanical work of keeping a life functional. I was the foundation she walked on without looking down. The marriage was not a disaster. I want to be honest about that. We didn't scream at each other. We didn't have the kind of marriage that collapses publicly in front of friends and leaves everyone unsurprised. What we had was something quieter and harder to name, a drift. 2 people sharing a house, a bed, a last name, a set of routines without ever fully inhabiting the same moment together. Dinners where we talked about logistics and never about anything underneath the logistics. Nights where we lay in the dark on our respective sides of the bed like 2 strangers who had agreed, without speaking, to respect each other's silence. In public, she still took my arm at neighborhood barbecues, still smiled at me across tables like we were a team. I told myself that meant something. I chose to believe it meant something. Looking back now, I understand that belief was the most expensive choice I ever made. There is one thing I told her early in our marriage, early enough that the words had weight, early enough that I meant them down to the bone. I told her plainly the way I say things I'm serious about. Cheating was the one thing I would never survive inside this marriage. Not because I was fragile. Not because I hadn't considered that marriages get complicated and people get lonely and the world is full of temptation. But because trust, to me, is structural. It is the thing that holds everything else up. You compromise that, and it doesn't matter how beautiful the house is, it falls. She heard me, I know she heard me. She nodded and she poured more wine and she said something like, "Of course, same." And I believed her, because at that point I had no reason not to. I sit with that moment, now the way you sit with a thing you can't take back. The morning this story really begins, I was at the kitchen tea. Able before sunrise. Coffee mug she bought me years ago, a heavy ceramic thing from some market in Santa Fe we visited on a trip that felt like a different lifetime. The neighborhood was quiet. The house was quiet. Everything was exactly the same as it always was. And that was the problem. The silence felt identical to every other silence, and I had started to understand, somewhere beneath the part of me that didn't want to understand it, that a silence can be a person's way of hiding something loud. I used to think a quiet life was proof of a good one. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. But I was not going to be wrong for much longer. 2 weeks before the Las Vegas pharmaceutical conference, Claire changed. Not dramatically, not in any way she thought I'd notice. She was subtler than that, I'll give her that much. She didn't come home cold or distant the way you'd expect someone to behave when guilt has its hands around their throat. She came home lighter, easier on the surface, harder underneath, like something had been decided for her and the decision had taken a weight off she hadn't admitted she was carrying. The criticism started small. The way I dressed for dinner, too casual, she said, like I'd stopped trying. The way I took too long to answer questions, as if my pauses were a personal affront. The coffee. She had never once in 15 years had an opinion about how I drank my coffee, and suddenly the way I stood at the counter in the morning bothered her. I absorbed it quietly because that is what I do. I assumed she was stressed. I assumed the marriage needed something I wasn't giving, and that my job was to figure out what that was and give it without being asked. That's what a foundation does. It adjusts, it holds. Then came the wine and the question. It was a Tuesday evening. The dining room table, the half-empty bottle of red she'd opened before I got home, the easy smile she wore like a costume. I remember the candlelight. She had lit the candles, which should have told me something because Claire didn't light candles without a reason. She asked what I thought about a whole pass. She framed it like a joke, delivered it like a test. Her voice was light, almost laughing, the way people sound when they want you to believe they aren't serious so that when you react, they can call your reaction the problem. I didn't laugh. I put my glass down on the table slowly and I looked at her, and I told her as calmly as I could hold myself that it would break me. Not metaphorically, not as an expression. I told her it would break the marriage and it would break whatever was left of my belief in the life we had built, and that I needed her to hear that the same way I had needed her to hear it years ago when we had first made those promises to each other. She rolled her eyes. She called me old-fashioned, said people our age didn't need to be dramatic about these things, said plenty of couples had these conversations without the world ending, and that I was being rigid and a little exhausting. I didn't argue, I went to bed. I lay in the dark and I thought about the way her eyes had moved when I answered, not surprised, not hurt, but recalibrating. Like my response was a variable she had already run through a model and found manageable. She came back from Las Vegas 5 days later. And that lightness I mentioned, the new, unfamiliar version of Claire, had deepened into something I recognized even then as not being about me at all. She laughed at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. She left the room to take calls she used to take on the couch. She stopped asking about my projects. She stopped asking about my day. She stopped asking, in general, about anything that involved the word we. She started using a word she had never used before. Freedom. Not shouted, not as a declaration, just dropped into sentences like it had always been there, like it was a thing she had always been quietly planning to say. I just need a little more freedom, Ronald. I feel like I'm suffocating. I heard that word, and something inside me went very, very still. Not angry, not yet. The anger comes later, and when it does, it doesn't feel like fire, it feels like cold water closing over your head. What I felt in that moment was a slow, sick clarity. The kind that doesn't arrive like a shock. It arrives like a diagnosis you already suspected, delivered in an office you already dreaded walking into. I started noticing what I had been training myself not to notice. A Bellagio hotel charge on our shared credit card, an upgraded suite billed during the Las Vegas conference, separate from the conference company account. A restaurant receipt time-stamped after midnight on a Wednesday when the sessions ended at 9. Ryan Calloway's name appearing in her phone notifications twice in one evening before she tilted the screen away from me with a casualness so practiced I. T had to have been rehearsed. I didn't confront her. I wasn't ready. More than that, I wasn't certain enough yet. A man who confronts without proof gets called paranoid, gets called controlling, gets handed a narrative he didn't write and can't escape. I needed something real. And then 3 weeks after Vegas, Claire's old iPad, still synced to her iCloud account, still sitting on the kitchen counter charging, downloaded a deleted voice memo. I don't know why I clicked it. Maybe I already knew. Maybe the part of me that builds things for a living had already done the structural analysis and arrived at the conclusion before my conscious mind caught up. I played it at 2:17 in the morning, standing alone in the kitchen in the dark. Claire's voice, relaxed, laughing, talking to her coworker Tessa in the easy, unguarded register people use when they are absolutely certain no one who matters is listening. Ronald's too stable to ever leave. He'll be hurt, sure, but men like him don't blow up their own lives. I listened to it twice. I stood there in the dark kitchen of the house I had built with my own hands, holding the iPad that still had a cracked corner from when she dropped it 2 years ago and asked me to handle the insurance claim. And I listened to my wife describe me like a piece of furniture she wasn't worried about. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked back to bed. I didn't say a word. She thought my silence meant I hadn't noticed. She thought the quiet was the same quiet it had always been, the quiet of a man too stable to make noise, too predictable to surprise her. She was wrong about that. My silence meant I had already started counting. The decision arrived quietly, the way the most dangerous decisions do. Not with a flood of emotion, not with rage or grief or the kind of dramatic internal reckoning that people describe in movies. It arrived the morning after the voice memo, while I was making coffee, watching the sunrise come through the kitchen window in thin gray strips, and I made the decision with the same methodical calm I used to review a construction schedule. I was not going to confront her. Not yet. Possibly not ever, not in the way she expected. What I was going to do instead was become exactly what she already thought I was. Quiet, predictable, safe, invisible. And I was going to use that invisibility as cover. From the outside, the next several weeks looked like this. Ronald loading the dishwasher. Ronald asking Claire if she needed anything from the store. Ronald sitting beside her on the couch watching whatever she had on, his face arranged in the expression of a man who is simply present, ordinary, unthreatening. Exactly the man she had described to Tessa with a laugh in her voice and not a single tremor of concern. From the inside, every action was a calculation. I found Vanessa Holt through a referral I tracked down carefully, a name mentioned once 3 years earlier by a colleague going through his own divorce. Former insurance fraud specialist. 38 years old, quiet-voiced, with the kind of eyes that document reality without editorializing it. I met her once in a coffee shop on the far side of Denver, and I gave her what I already had. The Bellagio receipt, the voice memo, Ryan Calloway's name, and Claire's travel schedule for the next 6 weeks. Vanessa didn't react. She wrote things down. She told me a number, and I wrote her a check from an account I had quietly opened in my name alone. Then she left, and I drove home, and I told Claire I'd been stuck in traffic. Vanessa tracked Claire's next 2 work trips. She photographed Claire and Ryan Calloway entering a hotel in Phoenix. She captured elevator footage. She time-stamped dinner reservations made under Ryan's company card at restaurants that had no business being on a pharmaceutical conference agenda. She documented a rental car returned with 240 miles on it when the conference venue was 6 minutes from the airport. She built a file the way I would have built a building, load-bearing evidence at the foundation, documentation rising clean and solid to the top. When she brought it to me, I looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then I thanked her. Then I made a copy and stored it in 3 separate locations. Meanwhile, I had been working on the financial architecture. I moved my direct deposit to the separate account I had already opened. Not dramatically, I didn't drain anything, didn't move anything that would trigger questions. I was deliberate. I began documenting every luxury charge Claire had run during the past 8 months, upgraded flights billed to our joint account, resort spa charges, late-night room service billed twice for a single occupancy room on a trip she told me was budget restricted. I pulled the call logs from our shared phone plan. I saved bank statements going back 14 months. I copied the synced messages from the all. iPad and backed the voice memo up on a cloud account, an external drive, and a thumb drive that lived in a lockbox in my truck. I was building a case the way I build everything, one piece at a time, making sure each component could support the weight of the next. Then I met Richard Reed. Richard Reed is 51 years old, divorce attorney, the kind of man whose office is deliberately understated because he has nothing left to prove. He listened to everything I brought him without once changing his expression. The receipts, the photographs, the voice memo, the documented financial waste. He reviewed Vanessa's file the way a surgeon reviews imaging, clinical, thorough, unsurprised. When he finished, he set everything down on the desk and looked at me across it. "Move slowly," he said. "Let her keep talking." I understood immediately. Claire's behavior was still evolving. Every week she grew more comfortable, more careless, more certain of the story she had already written about what Ronald would and wouldn't do. Every week she said more, charged more, revealed more. Her arrogance was an asset I hadn't anticipated, and Richard knew exactly how to let it compound. So I watched her come home from trips with a lightness she no longer tried to hide from me. I watched her stop apologizing for the coldness. I watched her begin treating the house like a transit point. Somewhere she stayed between better places, somewhere she kept her things while she figured out how to leave without losing what she felt entitled to. Ryan's name disappeared from her phone notifications. She had switched to a different app, something more encrypted. But the behavioral pattern was so clearly established in Vanessa's file by then that it no longer mattered what communication channel they used. The paper trail did not care about apps. There is a moment I come back to when I think about those weeks. I am sitting in Richard's office on a Thursday afternoon in early November, signing the retainer agreement, looking out his window at the gray Denver skyline. I am not crying. I am not trembling. I am not the man she described to Tessa. I am simply a man who has done the math and arrived at the only answer the numbers support. What I had discovered in those still and invisible weeks was something I hadn't expected to find. I was surviving. The man who had told Claire that cheating was the one thing he could not survive inside this marriage had lived through every morning since the voice memo without breaking. What I could not survive, what I refused to survive, was being underestimated, being managed, being the predictable variable in someone else's plan. Before I left Richard's office that day, he raised one additional item. Ryan Calloway's position at Claire's company was regional director, her direct superior. The person who had approved her travel reimbursements, which corresponded date by date, location by location, with Vanessa's documented hotel check-ins. Richard looked at me carefully. "There's a secondary option available," he said, "beyond the divorce itself, if you decide you want to use it." I asked how long we should wait. He said, "Until the moment she thinks she's already won." I nodded once. Then I drove home, made dinner, and asked Claire how her day had been. She told me. I listened. I said very little. I had the evidence. I had the attorney. I had the plan. The only thing I didn't have yet was the moment, and Richard had just told me that patience was the sharpest weapon in the room. I was beginning to understand exactly what he meant. 3 weeks before Richard and I planned to file, Claire sat me down at the kitchen table. She had the look of someone who had rehearsed the conversation so many times it had stopped feeling like a conversation and become a performance. Calm, measured, the practiced composure of a woman who had decided, somewhere between hotel rooms and late-night phone calls, exactly how she wanted this part of the story to go. She told me she wanted to separate. She did not say, "I have been sleeping with my regional director in at least 4 cities over the past several months." She did not say, "I told my coworker you were too predictable to fight back." She did not say any true thing. What she offered instead was a narrative, clean, constructed, and insultingly careful. She said the marriage had been emotionally empty for years, that she had felt unseen beside me, unvalued, invisible inside a life that looked fine from the outside but had hollowed her out from within. She said she had been doing a lot of reflection, that word, soft and responsible sounding, the vocabulary of self-help and morning podcasts, and that she believed they both deserved to be truly happy. She was the brave one in this version, the honest one, The woman who had finally gathered the courage to say the thing neither of us had been willing to say. She was asking me to agree that the Mariag had simply failed, mutually, organically, without blame. To absorb the weight of a shared collapse and let her walk away clean, hands open, conscience managed. I listened to every word without moving. There is a specific kind of cruelty in being lied to with your own emotions. She used my quietness against me. She used the real distance, the real drift, the real parts of our marriage that had genuinely gone cold, and she weaponized them into a story that erased what she had done. Yes, we had grown apart. Yes, the dinners had been hollow. Yes, I had probably missed things I should have seen. She took every true thing and used it to smuggle in the lie. I told her I needed a few days to think. She looked surprised. She had expected either an argument she could win or a surrender she could manage. She had not expected stillness. She did not know what to do with stillness because stillness was my territory, not hers. I called Richard that night from my truck, parked at the end of the street. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "She just changed the clock," he said. He explained it precisely, the way Richard explained everything, without drama, without wasted words. If Claire retained an attorney before we filed, if she established the narrative of a mutual emotional dissolution before the affair evidence entered the picture, the legal framing of the entire proceeding could shift. Her attorney would build the story of a woman who came forward honestly to end a loveless marriage, and our evidence would arrive looking like the reaction of a wounded man rather than the documentation of a deliberate, sustained deception. We needed to file first. Richard moved the filing date up by 2 weeks. Then came the secondary complication. Tessa Grant, the co-worker from the voice memo, the woman who had been present while Claire described me as furniture, reached out through a mutual friend. She was uncomfortable. That much came through clearly. She knew things she hadn't said. She hadn't volunteered to testify, she hadn't offered anything formal, but she hadn't denied anything either. The call was the call of a person who had begun to understand that the story she had been a quiet participant in was now a legal proceeding, and that the conversation she had been part of was on a recording that had been backed up in 3 places. I didn't pursue her. I didn't need to, and Richard agreed. Tessa was a corroborating detail at best, useful if she came forward willingly, a distraction if I had to compel her involvement. Vanessa's file was the case. Tessa was a footnote. But her reaching out told me something important about the atmosphere around Claire. The ground was beginning to shift under people who had felt safe standing on it. That night alone, I opened the evidence folder one final time. I had told myself I wouldn't look at the photographs again, that I had made my decision, and the photographs were exhibits now, not wounds. But I looked anyway. Claire and Ryan at the hotel entrance in Phoenix, her hand at his back in a gesture so casual it could only have come from months of repetition. Claire at a midnight dinner table, lit by candlelight, her head tilted back in laughter, the uninhibited kind, the kind she used to give me before we became 2 people respecting each other's silence in the dark. I looked at that image for a long time. I did not feel rage. I had moved past the place where rage lived. What I felt was something colder and cleaner, the specific clarity of a man who has cataloged every variable, confirmed every calculation, and arrived at the last step before the structure is complete. There was nothing left to protect except the truth, and the truth was sealed in a file that Vanessa had signed and Richard was about to submit. I closed the folder. I picked up my phone and typed a single word to Richard. File. The divorce papers were submitted the following Monday morning. Claire did not know. She was on a call in the bedroom with the door pulled most of the way shut, tilting toward a version of the future she had already begun planning without me. Somewhere on the other side of the city, Richard Reed walked those documents into a courthouse and made permanent what she still believed was under her control. She thought she was the one holding the cards. She had been holding them over a table that had already been turned. The door she was walking toward had already been locked from the other side, and the only key left was in my pocket. I chose the dining room table on purpose. Not the living room, not the kitchen counter, not the front porch. The dining room table, the same place she had sat across from me with her glass of wine and her rehearsed lightness, and asked me what I thought about a hall pass like it was a theoretical question about people neither of us knew. I wanted her to feel the symmetry of the lock. Asian, even if she didn't understand it yet. I wanted the room itself to remind her of who had started this. I arrived home before her. I set 3 things on the table and I sat down and I waited. A folder, a voice recorder, already running, a precaution Richard had advised for anything said before legal proceedings were fully underway. And my wedding ring, placed beside the coffee mug from Santa Fe, centered with the precision of a man who does things carefully and means them completely. When Claire walked in from the garage and saw me sitting there, she read the room the way she always read rooms, quickly, confidently, with the assumption that she could manage whatever she was looking at. She noticed the ring first. A short, incredulous laugh, the sound a person makes when they want to establish immediately that the thing happening is smaller than it is. She asked if I was seriously doing this over a joke about a hall pass. I slid the Bellagio receipt across the table without speaking. The laugh stopped. She looked at the receipt. She looked at me. I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes, the rapid, practiced recalibration of a woman who had prepared for the possibility of being caught and had a script ready. She said I had invaded her privacy. She said I was controlling. She said I had emotionally abandoned her for years and had the audacity to surveil her like a suspect while she had simply been trying to reclaim something the marriage had taken from her. She said the word controlling twice. She hit every note she had prepared: victim, survivor, woman of evolving needs, partner driven out by a man too rigid and too emotionally unavailable to see what he had done. She built the case against me with the fluency of someone who had been rehearsing it for months. And she built it without a single tremor, without a single crack, and I let her finish every sentence. Then I pressed play on the iPad. The room went silent the way rooms go silent when something irreversible enters them. Her own voice, relaxed and laughing, speaking to Tessa with the unguarded ease of a woman who had never once entertained the possibility that the stable, predictable man she had married might be listening. Ronald's too stable to ever leave. He'll be hurt, sure, but men like him don't blow up their own lives. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that room. She didn't move, she didn't speak. The color in her face did something complicated, and she pressed her lips together, and I watched her understand, in real time, that the script she had prepared was for a different conversation. One where she was the only person who had done any preparation. I laid the photographs on the table one at a time, the way Richard had advised, slowly, without narration, without accusation. Claire and Ryan at the hotel entrance in Phoenix. Claire and Ryan at the midnight dinner table, her head tilted back in the uninhibited laugh I had once believed was something she gave only to me. Claire and Ryan beside the rental car on a morning when she had texted me that the conference was running long and she wouldn't be back until evening. Each photograph carried Vanessa's timestamp along the bottom edge, dates, times, locations, a documentary record that did not editorialize because it did not need to. The dates aligned exactly with the travel reimbursements Ryan Calloway had approved for Claire's company account. She began to cry. I watched her and understood with a clarity that had no cruelty in it that the tears were not for me. They were not for the marriage or for what she had done to it or for the years we had spent building something she had chosen to quietly destroy. The tears were for the life she was watching evaporate in real time, the version of the future she had planned, the exit strategy she had rehearsed, the clean and manageable departure she had decided to take. I said the only thing I had prepared to say. You asked for freedom, I filed the paperwork. She looked at me across the dining room table like she was seeing me for the first time, and I think in some fundamental way she was. The courtroom came weeks later, and I will not pretend it was without cost. Claire's attorney was skilled and aggressive and built the first 2 days of proceedings on the narrative of emotional neglect, a cold, withholding husband, a woman driven to seek warmth and connection elsewhere, a marriage that had failed through mutual atrophy rather than individual betrayal. It was a good argument. It would have been a winning argument in a different case against a different man. Richard Reed introduced the evidence without theater. The receipts, the synchronized iCloud messages. Vanessa Holt signed and documented investigative report with timestamps, photographs, and corroborating financial records. The travel reimbursements approved by Ryan Calloway for trips during which he had. Shared Claire's hotel room. And then, after Claire's attorney had spent the better part of 2 days building a story about a woman of emotional depth and unmet needs, Richard played the voice memo. The courtroom went very quiet. Claire's attorney requested a recess. In the same week, the packet Richard and I had separately prepared reached Claire's company HR department. A senior employee using company-approved travel reimbursements for personal hotel stays with her direct superior, the same superior who had approved those reimbursements. It was not complicated. It did not require creative interpretation. It was, on its face, exactly what it appeared to be. The investigation opened immediately. Ryan Calloway, presented with the scope of what HR had received, did what men do when their careers are more real to them than the people they have treated carelessly. He cooperated. He confirmed the affair. He characterized it as mutual. He distanced himself from Claire so completely and so quickly that the speed of it said everything about what the relationship had actually meant. She lost him before she had finished losing the marriage. Ryan's wife filed for divorce and submitted her own statement to HR. The review expanded to include questions about other travel approvals and other boundary failures across Ryan's tenure as regional director. The investigation grew in ways that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the decisions he and Claire had made together in hotel rooms they believed were private. Ryan was out within 30 days. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had retained the house. The majority of my assets were protected. Richard had done that work months before we ever walked into a courtroom. The lifestyle support Claire's attorney had arrived expecting to secure had been methodically dismantled by the documentation of marital waste. The spa charges, the upgraded suites, the midnight room service for 2 on a budget-restricted trip. Claire left with legal bills that would take years to settle. She left with a professional reputation that had been quietly but permanently altered in every circle she had once moved through with confidence. She left with the knowledge that Ryan Calloway, the person for whom she had decided Ronald was too stable and too boring and too predictable, had cooperated with HR investigators within 72 hours of being confronted rather than absorb a single professional consequence on her behalf. She had paid full price for the freedom she had taken without asking. I drove home from the courthouse alone, parked in the driveway, sat in the car with my hands resting on the wheel and the engine off, looking at the house I had built, maintained, and never once stopped showing up for. I wasn't celebrating. There is nothing to celebrate in the wreckage of something you built with real intention and watched someone else dismantle from the inside. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even relieved, not exactly. I was simply finished. And there is a particular kind of peace in that, not the peace of getting what you wanted, but the peace of having been, at every step, exactly who you said you were. People ask me if I feel better. I tell them I feel accurate. There's a difference. Months after the divorce was finalized, I repainted the bedroom. Not a dramatic color, not a statement, just a different shade of gray, quieter than the one we had chosen together on a Saturday at a hardware store I can no longer remember the name of. I rolled it on by myself over a weekend, the windows open, the radio on low. When I finished, the room looked like a room that had always been only mine, and I stood in the doorway for a moment and let that be true without adding anything to it. I replaced the dining room table. Nothing expensive. Something smaller, something that didn't carry the memory of a folder and a voice recorder, and a ring placed beside a coffee mug at the precise center of a reckoning. Small changes, made quietly without announcement, the way I have always made things. The neighborhood continues. The barbecues happen. People still look at the house from the street the same way they always did, with the mild admiration people have for things that appear intact. But no one asks about Claire anymore, not to my face. That chapter has become the kind of thing people discuss carefully and briefly in other rooms, and then set down and move away from because there is no version of it that is comfortable to hold. She texted me once. Months after everything, late on a night I don't remember clearly, from a number I had never deleted because deleting it felt like an act of feeling rather than an act of sense. The message said, "I never thought you could be this cold." I read it once. I understood what she meant, and I understood that she had still, even then, even after all of it, diagnosed me incorrectly. It wasn't coldness, it was accuracy. There is a version of me she had always believed in, stable, predictable, too invested in the structure of his own life to burn any of it down. And that version had been real once. I had built my entire marriage around being that man. She had chosen to believe the version and ignore the man. I deleted the message. I set the phone down. I did not respond. I do not date. I do not post inspirational content about healing or growth or the lessons of betrayal. I do not tell this story at dinner parties or use it to explain myself to new people. The wound is real. I will not pretend it has been replaced by something cleaner. There are mornings when I sit at the kitchen table and feel the specific weight of a life that was supposed to be shared. And the feeling is not rage or bitterness, but something older and simpler. Grief, plain and stubborn, for the version of the story that didn't happen. But I sleep deeply through the whole night, without lying in the dark listening for the sound of a lie breathing quietly beside me. This morning I was at the kitchen table before sunrise. The new table now smaller mine, the same coffee mug from Santa Fe. The same early light coming through the window in thin gray strips falling across my hands. The neighborhood was quiet. The house was quiet. And for the first time in longer than I can trace, the silence was only silence. Not a cover. Not a thing hiding something louder underneath. Just the ordinary, inhabitable quiet of a morning that belongs to no one but me. I said it once to the empty room, not for her, not for anyone who might have been listening, just to hear it land in the air and stay there. You told me you wanted freedom. I just made sure you paid full price for it. The words settled and were still. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug. I set it back on the counter where it always goes. And I got on with the rest of my life.